If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
So let me ask you this morning, did you have role models when you were little? Are there characters around who exhibit traits and virtues that you decided you wanted to emulate? I did, even back at an age when I was so little. I didn't even understand English yet, only Hungarian. But I had a number of these role models. First was, in fact, Popeye the Sailor, and then the Mighty Hercules, and then Birdman and Space Ghost. These were all tough, heroic he-men who fought evil to protect the helpless. As I got older and I could actually understand the language, I had more role models. Around 6 or 7, it was Daniel Boone and, of course, Tarzan. And these heroes all along exhibited the same sort of values: rugged independence, courage, resourcefulness, and above all, goodness, a willingness to battle against evil and protect the helpless. Doc Savage was added, who added some mental brilliance to his abilities. And these were very influential on me as I grew up. Do you think role models actually matter? Well, let's find out. Some weeks back, we talked about Jesus' peeps, the people Jesus would hang out with. And today, we're going to talk about Jesus' peeps. I want to talk about who we should be hanging out with, who our peeps should be. And the reason for that is the Bible issues a solemn warning. In 1 Corinthians 15:33, it says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good habits," or corrupts good character, the different ways to translate that word. But the meaning is clear. Bad company is a problem. Now, why is that? And the reason is the company you keep influences you. Now, sometimes you want to be influenced, and you deliberately seek out people to influence you. Specifically, you actively want to learn from them. Now, in these cases, too, you need to make good choices. But there you need to make good choices, but you don't always manage to do it. I remember some years back, I was driving home from Mississauga. I had the radio on to a Christian station, and they were playing an interview show, Christian interview show, and talking to a Christian psychologist about child rearing. And he told this story. Anyone like this? He was in a mall one day. He had his, 6-year-old daughter with him. And they were in a toy store. She saw a toy that she really, really wanted. Well, the dad didn't get the toy for her. What did she do? She flung herself down in the aisle, in the mall, on her back, started screaming, pounding her fists on the floor, pounding her feet, throwing a tantrum. A psychologist said, "I just stepped over and kept on walking." And the audience that was listening to him, they all go, "Oh, wow." I said, "She looked at me and she got up and she ran past me, threw herself down on the floor again in front of me, started screaming and pounding, demanding she wanted the toy. And again, I just stepped over and kept on walking." And the audience is just stunned at such wisdom. Wow. He said she did it a third time. She ran in front of me, threw herself down, started screaming and pounding, and once again, I just stepped over and kept on walking. He said, finally, she just got up, she realized the tantrum wasn't going to work, and just came along quietly. And the audience was thinking this was just the best advice they'd ever heard about child rearing. You know what I was thinking? I was thinking, he has a child, 6 years old, who will throw herself down a public mall and throw a tantrum, and you think he knows how to raise children? It is so important to choose wisely who you are going to learn from. Now, sometimes you're going to make careful, well thought out decisions. For example, would you hire this guy to be your financial manager? I wouldn't. Would you hire this guy to be your fitness trainer? Yeah, I wouldn't. Who are you going to hire to teach you martial arts? This guy? Or are you going to get this guy? Well, actually, I'd go with this guy. And in fact, I did go with this guy. This is my old Sifu, Logwakzi, Wing Chun master. He was only 2 degrees separated from Yip Man. And I mean the real Yip Man, not the actor who plays Yip Man. So here's the problem. Sometimes you can't tell by looking. And when you make the wrong choice about who you're going to listen to, who you're going to learn from, who is going to influence you, the consequences can be devastating. The year is 931 BC. There's going to be a regime change in the kingdom of Israel. For 40 years, Israel had been ruled by King Solomon. And King Solomon, the son of David, had gotten off to a great start. God came to him and asked Solomon to ask for whatever he wants. Solomon asked for wisdom so that he could be a good king. God was pleased with that choice, gave him wisdom. Solomon became the wisest man in the world. He built that magnificent temple to God in Jerusalem. He built up Israel's territory to its greatest extent, its wealth to incredible levels. People were coming from all over the world to hear his wisdom. But somewhere along the lines, he went off the rails, seemed to start trusting his own political acumen, making numerous marriage ties to other nations, political arrangements, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and mostly pagan women. They were forbidden because God warned they would turn their hearts to their pagan gods. And the horrible thing happened. Solomon, the wisest man in the world, turned to following other gods, even building temples for them. Did he do it just to please his wives? Was he play acting? We don't know, but it sure looks like he turned. Temples for pagan gods in the kingdom of Israel. It also seems to have become somewhat oppressive of the people and built up some resentment among the population. But now it's 931 BC. Solomon has just died. His son Rehoboam is going to ascend to the throne to begin his rule. And it was possible to have a fresh start. And so the people sent a delegation to him, as we read in 1 Kings 12. And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the burdensome service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you." So he said to them, "Depart for 3 days, then come back to me." And the people departed. So Rehoboam asks for 3 days to think things over. How should he respond? And what he decides over that fateful 3 days will fundamentally determine the future of Israel. So what does he do? Seeks advice. King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he still lived, and he said, "How do you advise me to answer these people?" And they spoke to him, saying, "If you will be a servant to these people today and serve them and answer them and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever." That was a good move to consult with the elders. They'd been around the block a few times. They'd worked with Solomon. They knew what was what. They probably realized Solomon had been somewhat oppressive. So they were giving good advice. What does Rehoboam do after that, though? He rejected the advice which the elders had given him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. And he asked them the same question. And we find that the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, telling him to make things tougher. "Thus you shall speak to this people who have spoken to you, saying, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us.' Thus you shall say to them, 'My little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges.'" Wow, not very good advice. So there's a choice between the elders, the ones who know what they're talking about, And the young men, the ones he'd grown up with, these are his peeps. These are the ones who are influencing him. And so what happens? The people come back to Rehoboam on the third day, and the king answered the people roughly. He rejected the advice which the elders had given him. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges. And what happens as a result? Well, the people are not having it. And they see that the king did not listen to them. The people answered the king, saying, what share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. And they left. So we're not going to sit under Rehoboam's rule. We're done with the house of David. And so Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. And this is what happened. The kingdom split into two. Solomon was left with the southern kingdom of Judah, which included Benjamin, and the 10 tribes in the north all left. And he had two separate kingdoms. They lived sometimes at peace with each other, often in war. There were some periods of revival in the south, but never in the north, never in the kingdom of Israel. Lasted for just over 200 years, and then the northern kingdom was just completely destroyed by the Assyrians, never to return. All because of how Rehoboam answered the Israelite delegation on that fateful day in 931 BC. Let's look again at why he did that. He consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. The young men who had grown up with him, the advice of the young men. This is the problem. These were his peeps. These were the people he'd been surrounded with all his formative years. These were the ones who influenced him. And so he ignored the good advice of those who were in a position to know. Instead, he listened to his peeps, his buds, his posse, the ones he chose to surround himself with. Now, what if he had surrounded himself with quality people? What if he'd been careful to pick wise people, good people, people who would give him good advice? How different history could have been. But instead, he surrounded himself with foolish people, and the result was the splitting of his kingdom. Heavy price to pay for making bad decisions about who to listen to. So one of the most important life lessons the Bible has to offer, he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed. Proverbs 13:20. And again, whoever keeps the law is a discerning son, but a companion of worthless men shames his father. Proverbs 28:7. And then the righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. Guaranteed. Proverbs 12:26. Again, one of the most important life lessons the Bible has to offer. Why? Because you will learn ways from the people you choose to associate with, the people you choose to be your friends, the people who surround you. They will influence you, either for good or for bad. But rarely do we choose our friends carefully. You go to school, you go to university. Who do you end up having as your friends? Generally, the first people who talk to you. So you're going to have some friends, some companions. You just commit yourself to them without really assessing, are these quality people or not? Don't do that. Check for quality before you commit yourself to friendship or to any sort of relationship. Now, don't get me wrong. This does not, of course, mean that you cannot associate with today's equivalent of tax collectors and sinners. You need to associate with them. You need to do that to reach them for Christ, as Jesus himself did. But as we saw last time, they were not the ones that he chose to be his peeps. They were not the ones he chose as his circle of influence, nor should they be yours. Remember this crucial verse here, folks. Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good habits. 1 Corinthians 15:33. This applies to your friends. This applies to your role models. And everybody has role models, consciously or subconsciously. Now, who should be your role models? Well, if you listen to the world, your role models should be people who are rich, and the ones who are rich and famous and popular. Radical feminists are held up as people who should be your role models. People who spend their lives purveying atheist claims. but they have fame and they have popularity. These are all very, very worldly things. They're all things that have to do with treasures on earth that just do not last. These days, when they're suggesting who should be your role models, there's nothing about godly character. There's really nothing about values except your urge to embrace the values of secular Marxism. Notice the Bible suggests instead. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 11:1, imitate me, just as I also imitate Christ. Paul is holding himself up to be a role model. You should take me, says the Corinthians, take me as a role model. And then in Hebrews 13:7, the writer says, remember those who rule over you, that is those who follow, those who lead the church. Remember those who rule over you, who have spoken the word of God to you, whose faith follow, considering the outcome of their conduct. Okay, so the church leaders are held up as role models. And if church leaders are picked according to the standards set forth in the Bible, in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 13, and Titus chapter 1, verses 6 to 9, if we actually picked leaders that way, I think they would generally be good role models. But pay careful attention to what Paul said here. Imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. About the rulers of the church whose faith follow, considering the outcome of their conduct. You're not to follow them blindly. You imitate Paul as long as he is imitating Christ. When he stops imitating Christ, he's no longer your role model. You pick church leaders, and we pick them, and they may not be from our own church. They may be those popular, rock star apologists and speakers out there. You need to consider the outcome of their conduct. You don't follow them blindly. You look at what they're actually doing, and when they're not following Christ, when they're not imitating Christ, don't follow them. They're no longer suitable to be role models. The strange thing here is that North American Christianity so often seems to get it backwards. They go the other way. They're not holding up those who get it right to be the role models. The focus is on those who get it wrong. I remember some years I was driving back from Mississauga. I had the Christian radio station on. I was listening to another show. And in this one, the host was interviewing a young man and a young woman. They were telling their story. They had been Sunday school teachers at their church. They were also boyfriend and girlfriend. And of course, they talk about they loved the Lord, but they fell into temptation. They did the big nasty. And the story they were telling on the radio was all about their recovery, how they felt ashamed after, how they'd let down the kids, they'd let down the church. Most of all, they let down their parents. And they talked about how tough it was to own up to these things, to face the people they'd let down. The guy said that was especially the toughest was facing her parents and confessing what they had done. And I was listening, and I was doing this slow burn. Yeah? Now, partly it's because I didn't think they were actually repentant. Of course, I could be wrong, but I had that feeling because of all the things they said. They'd let down the church. They'd let down the kids, let down their parents. Never once did they say they let down God. Never once did they talk about the fact that they'd sinned against God. That wasn't even on their radar screen. So I don't know if they're genuinely repentant or not. But the thing that I really kept wondering about was this. There must be 100 Sunday school teachers out there who do their job faithfully, anonymously, who do not fall into sin. 100 for every one of these people on the show must be 100. And no one ever hears of them. No one ever hears of them. They did their job right. But these two, because they fell into sin, they get on the radio. They're the ones we want to hear from. They get their 15 minutes of fame. And I was wondering, what message is that show sending out to Christian young people? If you're faithful to God, you do things right, we don't care about your story. We don't want to know how to make sure you get things right. No. We only care about those who fell. That seems a problem to me. So the Bible has the opposite view when it says this. Imitate me just as I almost imitate Christ. These are the people to be held up, to view for Christians. Say, this is the way to do it right. Learn from that. We are to seek role models who get it right. Okay, that's why we don't pick a guy like this to be our physical fitness model. He didn't get it right. Okay, this is what we should be looking for, people who are getting it right. And we have to work at it. Hebrews 6:12 says, do not become lazy, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. Do not become lazy. Put in effort to find the right people to follow. Don't be lazy about it. Brethren, Philippians 3:17, brethren, join in following my example and note those who so walk as you have us for a pattern. And here too, Paul is saying, look, I'm setting the example. This is how you should do it. Follow my example. And not just me, but those who are doing that, those who are following my example, follow them as well. All of us are a pattern for you. Pick your peeps wisely. Pick your role models wisely. And again, Philippians 4:9, Paul still, the things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do. And the God of peace will be with you. So Paul is saying it's not just what I told you. It's not what just I taught you. It's not just what you heard from me. It's what you saw in me. You're learning from what you see. And Hebrews 11 is being called the Hall of Faith because Hebrews 11, the bulk of it is all about rehearsing these examples of people who were faithful to God and what they achieved. And they weren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Not at all. But they were faithful. Their first goal was to serve God. Some of them did great things. Some of them died martyrs' deaths. But they were faithful. So you do have a lot of options, folks, for good role models. Pick some. Pick some. But here's something else that you need to take seriously. We go back to Philippians 4:9. The things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me. When Paul is spending time with people, they're watching him. They're not just listening to his words. They're watching him. They want to see what he's doing. And here's the thing. Just as you are watching your role models, someone is watching you. And that's inevitable. If you name the name of Christ, you're a Christian, people will watch you. And they will learn, and they will receive, and they will hear, and they will see what you're doing. What is a Christian all about? And the question is then, what will they see when they look at you? It's easy sometimes, some Christians who just don't get it right, who shrug this off. They mess up, they do bad things. Some are quite hypocritical, actually. And then they just rather say, well, but, it's not me, it's Jesus. Look to Jesus. And to an extent, that is true. We're not son ourselves. It is Jesus, and if we fail, Jesus doesn't. We're to put our faith in him for salvation. And if we're surrounded by bad Christians, that's not an excuse. But your witness, your personal witness, what people see when they look at you can be extremely powerful and influential. I remember one time some years back, Jimmy Swaggart was one of those TV evangelists. You remember he really got on his high horse when Jim Baker, a fellow or rival TV evangelist, got caught in a sex scandal, and Swaggart was really beating the drums about that, how that's just unacceptable. And he kept doing that until he got caught by the police in a car with a lady of the night. And he didn't look good. His church tried to discipline him. He was very repentant, tears flowing down his face, until the church said, you're suspended for 6 months. He didn't want to leave for 6 months. He left the church, kept up his ministry. He's having a debate one time with Sheikh Ahmed Deedat, who was at the time the leading Muslim apologist. And Deedat brought this up to Swaggart, this peccadillo in which Swaggart had been caught. And Swaggart did the usual response. He said, well, I'm preaching Jesus, not me. Okay? Don't look at me, look at Jesus. And Deedat hit him with this line that was devastating and still is. He looked at Swaggart and he said, you're telling me Jesus can change my life. Why should I believe that if he can't change yours? People are watching, folks. The question is, what are they going to see when they watch you? If you want to improve the chances of being the sort of person that people will benefit from seeing, do remember to do these things, okay? The righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. Give some serious thought to who you want to be friends with. Not associates. You can associate with all kinds of people, and you need to. But the ones that are going to be your good friends, the ones you spend time with, the relationships into which you invest, choose them carefully. Make sure they're quality people, Christians, serious about their faith, living as disciples, being examples like Paul was. If you think this is not important, if you think you can just hang out with anybody, pick anybody, be your friends, make your choices based on secular values, you're deceiving yourself. And 1 Corinthians 15:33 says very, very clearly, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good habits. Not may corrupt good habits, not perhaps will corrupt good habits, could possibly corrupt good habits. Bad company corrupts good habits. So when you seek your peeps, Jesus peeps, pick their peeps, quality, Christian quality, and do it now, folks. Don't wait. Find good quality people. Let them surround you. Let them be the ones to influence you in the way that is right.
Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, and YouTube. Simply search Truth in My Days as one word. Again, Truth in My Days as one word, no spaces in between. And you can connect with us. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.